to come on Night Watch. Is communism bankrupt? Coop, the former Surgeon General, speaks out. And Scarlett O'Hara returns. Now in Washington, here is Night Watch guest anchor, Hodding Carter.
The communist governments of the world have been collapsing like dominoes, to use a familiar phrase. The authoritarian single-party regimes inspired by Stalin under Marxist-Leninist theory are dying, and the viability of the communist ideology is being questioned. As the symbols of communism fell in dramatic displays following the failed coup in the Soviet Union, new freedoms and new leaders rose to take their place. Question, is the communist ideal a bankrupt concept? We want to look this morning at how the collapse of communism is viewed from the American left. Three people are with us. Manning Marable is professor of political science, history, and sociology at the University of Colorado at Boulder. Joanna Misnik is an editor of the left-wing publication Against the Current. And Michael Parenti is a political scientist, lecturer, and author. Welcome to all three. And an obvious opening question, was communism killed? Did it jump on its own? Did it fall inevitably in the Soviet Union? What happened?
Go.
Well, I think that the inherent problem in all of these societies that went by the name communist is that at the root there was a basic problem. And the problem was the use of coercion to move people toward what was objectively a progressive ideal. The restructuring of society so that it addressed people's basic needs, but to use force to do that, to effectively deny them full democratic participation within the political process, meant that there was inherently a struggle inside of these societies, what Marxists referred to as an inherent contradiction. And that was the problem that we see not only in the Soviet Union, but throughout Eastern Europe.
Do you agree with that? And if it's true, was it an inherent contradiction from the beginning?
Well, I would say an immense amount of force was used, but a good deal of that force was not for that purpose. It was to fend off the attack from capitalist countries. When Soviet Russia came into existence, it was immediately invaded by 14 Western nations, including the United States. Armies went in. The White Guard Army went in. There was terrible attacks. And what the Bolshevik revolutionaries discovered, that while trying to build this society, they also had to build a secret police, a counter-espionage, a Red Army, and the emphasis again and again became one of survival. Survival means unity. Survival means less dissent. Survival means if you dissent, you give comfort to your enemies and invitations to them to attack us further. And so much of the distortions of the revolution that came in, not all, but much of the distortions, as in Nicaragua, I think, although they did a much better job of it, was because of the capitalist encirclement, threat, attack, embargo, boycott, and arms race that came later on. So I would say that Ronald Reagan and his friends deserve some of the credit for having distorted and made communism what it was.
So in other words,
I think that you can fuse both of those elements. I think fundamentally socialists say that you cannot uncouple democracy and socialism. That if you're talking about socialism as a new type of social order that takes capitalism a progressive step forward, you can't relinquish the democracy that we've accomplished under capitalism through struggle, actually. That we want to expand that democracy. And the inherent contradiction that Manning discusses was quite real. You can see it because the people have exposed it. Once there was an opening in Glasnost, what do people want more than anything else? The right to express themselves, freedom of association, freedom of the press, things that were denied them throughout the entirety of the regime in the Soviet Union and in Eastern Europe. So this is a human condition, a wanting of democracy. This was absolutely lacking, and you can't call that a revolutionary dynamic if you've stifled the democratic will of the people. That's the major, I believe, contradiction. And I wouldn't call that socialism in that sense. I would call it a post-capitalist transitional society lacking many things. And I also agree with Michael that the West sought to completely destroy that society, thus distorting its economy.
But if socialism means at its core the state controlling the means of production, and I may be way overstating this, if it does, the capitalist says you will always have state control, you will never have democracy, you can't make people give that up.
I think that looks at socialism from above rather than from below. And that, for me, democratic socialism essentially addresses basic human needs is it right in this country for 2 to 3 million Americans to sleep in the streets and gutters of the streets? Is it right to have 32 million Americans to have no form of health care? I mean, those are the kinds of questions that have animated and have given life to the whole dynamic of a democratic socialist vision.
We'll come to the United States in 1 second, but staying with the Soviet Union for a moment, was it in fact ever possible to have the democratic socialist ideal in Russia? I mean, Marx, for one, did not think so for a very long time.
Well, he did. Well, look, the Communist Party had a workers' opposition in it. A workers' opposition which actually took it upon itself to criticize, within the party, they were communists too, but criticize what was going on and act as an organized caucus in opposition. And Lenin ended that opposition in May 1921, but it was after that civil war, after all those attacks, he said, we've had enough opposition, end it. It was like a reaction to all the attacks they were under. So the democracy that they might have developed, it's hard to say how they might have evolved and how they would have developed if they had been left alone and been allowed to work in peace. I mean, look at this. What's remarkable about the collapse of communism is this was supposed to be a monolithic, totalitarian, terroristic society where everyone lived in fear, and the thing collapsed with almost a minimal loss of life. People came out, a couple 100,000 people came out on the streets, all sorts of things happened, and the ruling elite said, we've got to make concessions, we've got to change things, we've got to open it up. I'd love to see that happen in Guatemala or El Salvador or any number of other right-wing U.S. client state countries where people go out. Or I'd love to see it in this country. We get 100,000 people out on the street and we get a little notice in the paper about this big. It's not even just to safeguard a legal abortion.
I mean, a very quick question for a very quick answer.
Right.
Is the result of the upheaval in the Soviet Union in what is now, whatever it is, going to be more democracy that you think you have to have, a better society? And this has to be a quick one and we'll
More
come back.
democracy, not necessarily a better society, because of the distortions of the bureaucratization of those societies. There is no denying that most people now, unfortunately, couple capitalism and democracy.
Right.
And these will become client states of the International Monetary Fund and have an economic relationship to the global market very similar to the relationships in Latin America. The working people there will become exploited, I think disillusioned, and because they see themselves as a class with certain historic interests, certain needs, I think potentially you will see some new left rebirth in these societies when the full impact of becoming a client state of the IMF and what that means, that you no longer have free health care, you no longer have free education, you do have unemployment, you do have all those safety net is torn down, I think you will see a reaction against that.
And we will come back in a moment for more on the reaction to the collapse of communism in the Soviet Union and elsewhere. This is Night Watch.